You know exactly the feeling I'm talking about, right? It's that sudden, sharp sting of bitterness that just hits you right in the chest when you see someone else doing exactly what you wish you were doing. You see their success, and instead of feeling inspired, you kind of just feel angry. You might even find yourself instinctively picking them apart, telling yourself their success is somehow unearned, or they've totally lost their way, or they just had a crazy lucky break. It literally feels like a physical weight, doesn't it? Well, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a deeply uncomfortable but absolutely fascinating psychological truth about why we react this way and what it actually means for you.
So let's just dive right into this. I want you to really ask yourself, why do you hate success? Or actually, let's be more accurate here. Why do you hate their success? When you look at someone who has achieved exactly what you want, why does your mind immediately scramble to convince you that they didn't really earn it? What's absolutely mind-blowing here is that this anger isn't actually about the other person at all. No way. It's not some moral judgment on their character. It's a mirror.
Which brings us to Section 1, the anatomy of envy, a map of your own potential.
You see, that bitterness you're feeling is actually a symptom of what the legendary psychoanalyst Carl Jung called the invisible architecture of your own psychology. Basically, it's your own mind trying to tell you something incredibly important about yourself. To really get this, we've got to understand a concept called shadow gold. Shadow gold represents the qualities we repress in ourselves, which we then project onto other people as resentment. So, that intense anger you feel toward that highly successful person in your field, that is literally your own unrealized potential screaming at you from across the room. Think about a former peer who, say, just launched their own massive business. Your mind instantly labels them a grifter, right? But that's just to protect you from the uncomfortable fact that you've been too afraid to take your own creative risks. You're reacting to the parts of yourself that you've hidden away, ignored, or just completely failed to nurture.
Let's move on to Section 2, Jung's invisible architecture, the tragedy of unused talent.
I really want to let this reality sink in for a second. You don't just fall in love with what you need, you also hate what you have failed to become. Wow, Jung realized that when we haven't developed certain aspects of ourselves, our psyche doesn't just leave those qualities dormant. They don't just, peacefully go to sleep in the background. Instead, your psyche projects them outward. When you see someone who is truly singular, someone who is just undeniably successful, your psyche fires a projection at them with a force that feels almost like fate. But that intense, fateful reaction, it's really just unfinished business with yourself. And man, this brings us right to the excuses we make. These excuses basically act as a form of psychological debt. Think about that one person who irritates you the most because of how loud or incredibly ambitious they are. You naturally tell yourself things like, ugh, they're just a narcissist, or they just got lucky, or their success is completely unearned. But the hard truth? Every single quality you find yourself criticizing in them is very likely a quality you were fully capable of building in yourself, but you just didn't. This projection is a massive psychological debt you've accrued by playing it safe and staying small. And like all debts, it eventually demands to be paid. When their success absolutely devastates you with recognition, it's simply because you're seeing the outline of the exact self you haven't yet had the courage to build.
Okay, Section 3. The ego's defensive formation. Why your mind chooses hatred over inspiration.
So we have to ask, why does the mind automatically choose hatred over inspiration when it's faced with someone else's achievement? Well, it comes down to this brilliant quote, "The ego is a defensive formation, a scar that learned to call itself a face." Your ego isn't actually designed to make you happy. Let me say that again because it's absolutely crucial. It is not designed for your happiness. It's designed to keep you continuous. It's built to fiercely protect your current sense of self, even if that self is completely miserable. It's basically a defense mechanism, fighting tooth and nail to survive the slow, quiet erosion of who you think you are.
If we contrast familiar suffering with unfamiliar freedom, the whole dynamic becomes crystal clear. On one side, we've got familiar suffering, that's your ego, your victim identity. On the other side, we have unfamiliar freedom, which means individuation, stepping up, and living extraordinarily. And guess what? The ego is going to choose familiar suffering every single time. Why? Because if you actually admit that the person you hate is genuinely talented or hardworking, your current identity, the version of you that almost made it or is just unlucky, would have to die. Success in others is a direct, literal threat to your excuses. And for a lot of folks out there, the excuse is the very last thing they have left to hold on to.
Moving to Section 4, the refusal of the hero. Sabotaging your own perception of greatness.
This is the exact moment we actively sabotage our own perception of greatness,
just to comfortably wrap ourselves back up in the familiar identity of a victim. Living extraordinarily means surrendering the idea that you're just a helpless victim of circumstance, and quite frankly, that is terrifying for the ego. Because of that refusal, we stay totally stuck in a loop. Psychic energy gets discharged through resentment rather than actual action. Listen, every single hour you spend doom-scrolling online, endlessly analyzing why someone else is arrogant or how they just got a lucky break, that is stolen psychic energy. It's energy you are literally bleeding out through bitter complaints instead of using it to build forward momentum. All that energy should be directed toward your own individuation, that psychological process of becoming a genuine, fully realized self. By hating on them, you are tossing away the exact fuel you need to succeed.
Which brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, Section 5, doing the shadow work, making the unconscious conscious.
So how do we actually get out of this mess? How do we stop the bleeding? Well, the exit out of this trap definitely isn't finding someone less successful to follow just so you can feel better about yourself. No, it requires doing the actual, messy shadow work to settle this psychological debt once and for all. Step 1. Stop running from the discomfort. Instead of fighting the part of you that feels bitter, you need to turn directly toward it. Sit with it. Step 2. Ask what devastated you with recognition. What specifically did you see in their life or their behavior that triggered you so deeply? And finally, Step 3. Redirect energy to your vocation. Once you identify that hidden potential, you take that raw, intense energy you were using to hate them, and you pour it entirely into your private contract with your deepest self.
This brings us to the absolute most crucial step. I really want you to hear this question and challenge yourself to answer it honestly. What did I believe about myself that made this person's success feel like a personal attack? Answering this is exactly how you make the unconscious conscious. Yeah, it's deeply uncomfortable, it's difficult, but it is the absolute key, the real game changer for unlocking the potential you've been repressing for years. Now, for those of you who are fired up and ready to take this framework and go deeper into these maps of the mind, definitely check out the resources for this explainer. Beyond the Shadow breaks down these core Jungian ideas even further, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a highly structured 30-day path to actively apply all of this to your own life. You can find both of those resources linked right down in the pinned comment.
Finally, I want to leave you with this provocative thought. What did you recognize in yourself today? If this explainer landed in a way you weren't quite expecting, I'm challenging you right now, skip commenting on what you simply thought of this analysis. Instead, I want you to comment on what you recognized in yourself while watching it. Because simply acknowledging your own shadow gold is the very first step. The work doesn't end here, my friends. It's only just begun.